We're brewing some Say because everybody keeps posting on Reddit. They're like, how do I brew Say? I'll show you guys. As the self-proclaimed #1 fan of Say, I'll show you guys my recipe again. But this works on most light roast coffees.
How often do you get to slow feed on an EK?
I'm gonna show you guys how I brew V60. So there is like a weird GoPro video that I shot a long time ago, but a lot of this is designed to create a very vibrant cup that is acidity forward. So if you actually talk to Lance from Say, or if you actually look at how they brew V60, Say brews V60, it's actually focused on pushing coffees very, very hard, or doing something like long ratio, long brew, like 5 to 8 minute brew on something like actually a V60. And they use things like mellow drip. That way of brewing is very low agitation, maximum clarity. The logic, I think, from that type of brewing is that, Say, for example, is like we are sourcing coffees that are very dynamic. So if you brew in a very high clarity way, if you brew in a large ratio, if you brew, push our coffees very, very hard, and you brew in this max clarity way with low agitation, these dynamics should exist in the cup. However, I think this is quite equipment dependent, and also it's kind of hard to do. And also sometimes the brews are so harmonious that it actually becomes kind of difficult to taste. So I wanted to basically look at it and say, well, okay, I like this type of coffee, this type of roasting style because of those crazy dynamics and acidity. So instead of hoping the coffee has those dynamics, why don't I try to create those in the cup? And that's where I've started to brew high agitation, high kettle agitation, high physical agitation, and also grinding quite fine, and using something like the Cafec T90 paper filters that help catch the fines and increase the flow rate and let me pull out all of that acidity and create a very dynamic brew. So I have 20 grams of this Peru Gesha here, and this can work for a majority of coffees, and I'm using off the boil water, 100 degrees Celsius. So a lot of people will ask about, what temperature to brew these lighter roast coffees at. I like 100 Celsius off the boil. My kettle's over there. Somebody will hand me one. I'm gonna pre-wet this paper filter. I like to use these paper filters because they help catch the fines as I aggressively agitate physically and with the kettle. And they also flow incredibly fast. And I have 20 grams of coffee here. This is on the finer side, although you can go very, very fine. Even with brewing low agitation, you can go very, very fine as well and manipulate a lot of fines with something like a mellow drip. I'm just gonna do that with hard kettle agitation. So what I like to do is I got 20 grams in here. I'm going to pour 60 in here. And then I'm gonna get in here and hard kettle agitate. And I'm actually rotating this WDT tool, or wet WDT tool, to make sure all these grounds, like say some of these drier grounds, are all saturated. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna let this sit for an entire minute. So this minute-long bloom is what is bringing in a lot of that acidity, for me at least. And somebody in a Reddit post has properly described the actual logic and science better than me, and you can read it on somewhere. I'll link the post.
Is it r/pour-over?
I think it's on the pour over subreddit. I don't know. I got linked to this and I was like, whoa, people actually talk about this recipe. Very cool. But this 45 seconds to 1 minute bloom, I like 1 minute. That's what really brings in those dynamics. And also doing stuff like this. So at 1 minute, I'm just gonna go, look at how aggressive I'm pouring. I pour up to 170 or 160. I honestly think that second pour, if you're pouring up to like 160 or 170, it doesn't really matter, but it's basically 3 pours. Do 60 to 170 and then up to 340. So I like to at least push these coffees to 1 to 17 ratio. I'll finish this pour and I'll talk a little bit more on that. So at 130, I like to pour the rest of the coffee, the water in, and I'm pouring very, very hard, high agitation.
Oh, but you're pretty close to the dripper.
Yeah, I'm very close. And at 340, I do that. And then I'm going to swirl and I'm going to tap. So as you see there, a lot of the fines are all shot out to the side there. So, and the T90s here do a really great job at capturing all of those fines. And if you look down here, you can see, or if you actually look at the flow, you can see the flow is still very, very steady. So your total brew time with this recipe, even with the 1 minute bloom, is going to be around 3 to 3.5 minutes, generally speaking. Of course, depends on grind sizes and coffee here and what grinder you're using. But if you see here, look at how those fines are captured. We are finishing up basically at 3 minutes. This recipe at times is also grind size agnostic if you really tap into the physical agitation. But as you see here, the bed is going to look ugly, and if the bed looks ugly like this, that means you've done it right because you've pushed all the bad stuff, the fines, out into the edges of the V60. And then I go in here and I agitate. So what's really cool about this tool is if you see this, I can go and swirl the V60 around. I can push all the dry parts of the coffee into here. And now, I'm doing something not like you wouldn't do stuff like this where you push all the coffee grounds around like that. But the point is I can go in and actually touch all the different edges. So this lets me have a ton of control in terms of agitating or saturating that first initial bloom. And this physical agitation as well as longer bloom, to me, helps push up that perceived acidity. So I want to quickly talk about why this recipe is good, why this recipe is not so good, and what to exactly look for. Like, pros and cons of this recipe. And also, I guess we can quickly talk about brewing low agitation for these coffees that maximize clarity. So let me talk about this recipe first. The idea with this recipe is to push all of that acidity up front. So what happens when you taste this is that the linger of stuff is going to not exactly be there for as long. You might get some sort of sweetness in there, but you're not necessarily going to get an insanely long linger of acidity throughout the cup. But to me, this is going to give you that very apparent sense of vibrancy. It's going to probably finish very juicy and sweet, but the actual linger of acidity is not going to be as long if you did more pours or if you did brewed lower agitation. The reason why I like this recipe though is because it is sometimes less equipment dependent. So this allows you to push coffees quite hard, although there are some caveats. So I want to talk about that real quick. If you are brewing with a smaller conical burr grinder that does not let you push coffees as hard, I probably wouldn't push the coffee out to 1:17 ratio. I like 1:17 as a starting point with most coffee grinders and most of these SEY coffees because it does let you extract enough and you can taste the coffee a little bit better. The challenge is, like, I see people try to push brew long ratio with some of these coffee grinders that it just doesn't handle it well. So like 1:18, 1:20 on something like a Lago Mini is kind of going to get a little muddy there. So I would recommend you lower the ratio there. And sometimes I think people are perceiving this muddiness as like the coffee tasting brown or the coffee tasting muddy. And that just might be because you are pushing your burr set too hard. So this is where this recipe comes in and tries to mitigate that a little bit, which is let's shift up all of that acidity up to the front so you are perceiving that a little bit more than the muddiness of the cup if you were to just push a coffee out to a very large ratio. If you just brew like this, generally speaking, you probably are hitting around 22 to 24% extraction yield. That's been my experience with a ton of different coffee grinders, and people have tried this recipe. You can get high extraction yields and extract everything if you want to look at numbers. Whereas if you did brew 5 to 7 minute long mellow drip, low agitation like you see Lance from SEY do at times, you can actually hit 25 to 27% extraction yield, but not a lot of coffee grinders can handle that. So I like to be a little bit safer and lower that ratio and brew this higher agitation stuff. And this seems to be a little more forgiving, but the entire point is like, I want to create dynamics in the brew instead of relying on the coffee to have dynamics. Even though these coffees have a lot of dynamics and acidity in them, you can take advantage of that and emphasize that more and shift that all up. I finished rambling. Let me actually taste this and have some of these other guys taste it. But in my original video, you definitely can scale this up and down depending on what size of dripper you're using. I like to use the O2 because it gives me literally more space to do more aggressive swirling and really, I mean, like still, if you look at this, all the fines are captured there. But, I just felt like it was really funny to see people post about this recipe. So I wanted to see if this video would help add any sort of context to why I do things in a slightly more not so shaky way. I had the GoPro on my head, but yeah, let me give this a quick taste. Yeah, so wow, this is a great coffee. Peru wash gesha. They got a savda in, super, like, oh my God, this is so clean. But very vibrancy and acidity forward. So the thing that I'm tasting here is like all of this acidity is shifted up front. And then it just kind of sharply drops off very fast. So instead of like say an acidity lingering and then going down like that, it's just like here is all of this information of clarity or acidity shifted up front here, and then it leaves your mouth quite quickly. So that's where it's forgiving in the sense that if you had a grinder or a coffee or whatever you're doing that was muddy or astringency or whatever, that is kind of just glossed over, like it's just gone or minimized in a sense. So that's what my goal is with brewing some of these coffees, is to just create the dynamics in the actual brew. But wow. This is great. This is a great coffee here. Some additional things that I would do. Obviously, I'm brewing at a farmer's market, but if you're brewing at home, I would put the kettle back on the base to try to maximize the temperature. And also with these coffees, I would really let them sit and cool, but my goal here is to maximize the acidity, not necessarily like the body or the sweetness, although these brews do finish very, very sweet. So, you know, I hope this was helpful in terms of adding a little bit of context, but I just thought it was hilarious people are posting about this on Reddit. So hopefully this is helpful, and thank you guys for supporting the meme recipes. But yeah, all right. Yeah, and also hang out at Moonwake. As usual, we got the truck behind me, and yeah, cool. See you guys later.